Now, going back to Brexit, of course, now we're just a few days away, and there will be more memorial services tomorrow for the young mother and wife who was murdered last week, 1 week exactly before the Brexit vote. And as I pointed out earlier in the show, if you look at all the things that are involved, I mean, we're going to have David Cameron his government will fall. He will lose his position as prime minister. The Germans, the politicians, as well as the multinational corporations are not happy about Britain leaving. They want that counterbalance to their power, a perceived counterbalance to their power. And as Dr. Paul Craig Roberts was talking about, the real thing that we should all be concerned about is what's going on with NATO, as we see NATO pushing its way into the Ukraine and the Crimea, trying to create a conflict, and then coming out this last week, talking about how a proven cybersecurity threat, we'll have to take their word for it, just like we do all of these attacks. We'll have to take their word for it. There won't be any bodies. There won't be anything that we can see. They'll just tell us what we need to know for this, and then they will start World War III with Russia. You know, it was the fear campaign that the people who want to remain in the European Union were pushing. They were saying, hey, there's going to be a war in Europe if you leave. There's going to be an economic collapse. There's going to be rising mortgages. Yeah, I'm sure they will play with it. You know, they had the LIBOR scandal, the London interbank rate, where they were rigging that. That's what all your variable rate mortgages are based on. Every year when your mortgage comes up for reevaluation, it's that LIBOR rate. These people were playing games with that to make money hand over fist. They got caught doing it. They didn't go to jail. Got a long list of bankers who, quote unquote, committed suicide. We showed you at least 3 of those. Talked about that last week. One in great detail, how he was pushed out of a window, looks like. They found him on his back in the street. He was there for 20 minutes before he died. A couple of guys walk out of the building where he had fallen for 3 stories. And they say, hey, if you're jumping, you're not going to land on your back, really. You're going to land on your front. Okay, but he landed on his back. They had surveillance cameras, interestingly enough, and that's the new evidence that came out. They said he was beaten on the face, the front of his head, and these 2 guys in suits walk out shortly after he falls. They walk over, they say a couple of things to him, and then they calmly walk off. They don't call for help. Okay? A suicide note written to his wife where he writes her name in a way that he'd never written her name, never called her Tony. All these things happened as his bank was involved in a massive scandal. He was the scapegoat for this. So you don't think these people will kill somebody for trillions of dollars? They've killed for a lot less than that. A lot less than that. And so when we look at all this, and we look at how they're playing this, I mean, just look at this corporation here. Look at Uber. We've had this fight here in Austin about background checks. They couldn't come to an agreement, so the city of Austin said, hey, we do background checks on taxis. We're going to do them on Uber as well, because we've had some people here, as well as other cities, where you've got a taxi driver that works for Uber. Let's call him, they call him an Uber driver, not a taxi driver. Same thing. You get into their car, these people are criminals, and they're not doing proper background checks on them, and we can't see those background checks. We've had a lot of situations where women have been raped or physically assaulted. We want to have background checks. They say, we put background checks on us, we leave. So they shut down all of the Uber transportation here in Austin. And now Uber is coming out and saying, you know what? If you do background checks, it's racist. It's racist. You're racist against Hispanics and blacks if you do background checks. Because, you know, it's racist if you have to produce photo ID to vote. Anytime they don't want you to do something, they always play the race card, don't they? Always play the race card. Very interesting. Even though the taxi industry has to do that, no background checks for Uber, okay? You can ban guns and say we got to have a background check, but no background checks for the people coming in over the borders. Only when it's something that they want will they push for these types of checks. But if it's something they don't want, they'll say, we don't need that. All right, so let's talk about what's going on with Brexit. And again, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. There was 8 points that were out by Boris Johnson, who is trying to encourage people to leave the European Union so they can be free, so they can have their sovereignty again, so they can be more prosperous. Because the European Union is a nanny state parasite at the very least, okay? And, of course, as Dr. Roberts pointed out, he didn't talk about the issue of NATO trying to create a war, but we'll talk about some of the economic issues. And let me ask you this. Does this sound like far-right extremism, or is this just level-headed common sense? Here's some of his reasons. £350 million per week more to spend as Brits wish with their priorities. In other words, you spend it on your welfare state or your national health care, whatever. And remember, we're talking about pounds. 350 million pounds, multiply that by about $1.50 for dollars. So that's about $500 million a week that they would have that they're currently sending to the European Union. You could take back control of your borders. You could stop the huge pressure of immigration on public services. He said, number 3, we'd be taking back control of our democracy. We'd be able to set our own laws and not be prisoner to the 2,500 EU regulations coming out every year from Brussels that cost us £600 million per year to comply. Number 4, we'd be able to do free trade deals with the rest of the world, even with America, he said. Number 5, we'd be able to get from the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, kind of like our Supreme Court is imposing all kinds of things on us that are not legal. He says it's increasingly arbitrating in questions over which we never thought it would have any power. Sounds like our Supreme Court, doesn't it? Like human rights, like asylum, like the right of the child. Number 6, he said, if we stay in the European Union, they will continue to drag ever further towards a federal structure in which the UK should frankly have no part in supporting, something called the euro. Okay. Number 7, all the countries that have done really well in the OEC in the last few years have been outside of the single market. And there he is. This is what I'm summarizing this quickly from. And finally, number 8, he says, fundamentally, we'd be believing in Britain again. We'll be able to take back control and do things our way, and I think it'd be a galvanizing thing for British democracy, for our economy, to take back control June 23rd and vote leave. Now, they were ahead 19 points before this shooting. In the aftermath of that shooting, we have seen the people who are rational. There's no arguments in here that are racist. There's nothing here that is hateful. It's all about economics. It's all about individual freedom. It's about having control of their country and their destiny. Those are not things anybody should be ashamed of, but they've been shamed and portrayed as hateful people. Look at this headline from Zero Hedge. Europe's message, those who oppose EU membership are violent. That's what they've been doing since then. So since this happened, everybody said, well, we're going to just stop talking about leave and we're going to stop talking about remain, those two issues, because somebody said that he said Britain first as he killed her. And there were people on site who disputed that. But because of that, the people who want to remain in the European Union have been holding her up in memorial and talking about the hatred that killed her for several days now. And the other people have been put into silence, have been totally silenced. And we see that happen in the United States as well. That's something for us to remember. Don't ever let them falsely accuse you and put you into silence. And now we've seen the leave drop by 22 points. Now, one of the things Dr. Roberts was talking about that looks very much like a false flag. Whenever we see these false flags and immediately they find the guy, immediately they have the motive, immediately they know everything about this guy, you should question that. You should say, that looks suspicious. And that's precisely what happened in this case. And where did that information come from? You know, it's the United States who created the European Union, along with some elitists in Europe. They want to keep NATO together. They want to keep the European Union together. And it was from the United States that we learned all this information about how he was a white supremacist from no one other than the Southern Poverty Law Center. These people who are always out there pushing this narrative of racism and hate. And so immediately as this happened, we have the actual documents going back to 1999 from this little tiny organization that doesn't even have any subscription membership or anything since 2013. The guy that's there now, Special Forces operator, he says, hey, this is such a mess. We had no money. I couldn't find any records. But boy, they didn't have any problem finding this record from this guy. And yet everybody who knew him said he was a gentle soul. He never attacked anybody. His brother, who was half black, said he was incredibly gentle.
I got so busy fighting the globalists for 15 years, I turned into a giant fat slob when I was an exercise fanatic before. Now, in the last 5 years, I set out to try to get back in shape. And to help turbocharge that, I talked to top scientists and nutraceutical developers and said, I want something that blocks these estrogen mimickers, something that helps me get back to what a real male was like instead of this globalist bombardment. And we developed Super Male and Super Female Vitality. They're bestsellers. They're loved across the industry. They're amazing. You owe it to yourself to get a bottle of Super Male Vitality today at InfoWarsStore.com. Folks, it's so amazing what Mother Nature gave us. You're crazy if you don't at least try a bottle of this, because you can't lose. You're fighting the info war and the fight for freedom worldwide, while at the same time getting a game-changing supplement at InfoWarsStore.com. Super Male Vitality is now back in stock. It's been sold out for several months, and it's available at InfoWarsStore.com or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139.